Do you ever have a sneaking suspicion that you're being watched? That feeling of dread and paranoia is about to come alive for you in this installment of Fear Awaits, our series where the scariest monsters are the ones we can't see. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Fear Awaits. I'm your host, and tonight we're diving into more spine-chilling tales of terror from beyond the grave. We all have that one friend who swears they've never seen a ghost. But then there's the rest of us, the chosen few who've encountered spirits that make our blood run cold. Let's hear some of their stories. First up is our next story, the ghost train. When I was around 18 years old, I had just started my first job after college. It was at an amusement park in the maintenance department. My hours were Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and I absolutely loved it. I got to ride pretty much every ride as many times as I wanted before and after my shift. I could come and go as I pleased, within reason, of course. Park was closed on Mondays and Tuesdays, so those days were spent on smaller projects or cleaning and painting rides, etc. This was great because it gave me time to work up the courage to ride some of the scarier rides during operating hours. On one such Tuesday afternoon, I was working alone in the maintenance shop when I heard what sounded like a train whistle. I thought nothing of it until I heard the sound again. Still, I didn't think much of it. Then I heard it a third time. By this time, I was really freaked out. The only way to get to the park was by riding the train, and I was sure that there was no one else there. I decided to investigate. With my trusty 2x4 in hand, I headed outside and toward the tracks. As I got closer, I could hear what sounded like an entire train. Now, it was definitely coming from the tracks. I could hear the wheels screeching on the tracks. There was a loud bell ringing and people screaming and yelling. I remember shoving some leaves out of the way and jumping onto the tracks to try to see what was going on. All I saw was the ground vibrating beneath me, and the closest thing to a train car was an old, dilapidated station building. At this point, I was terrified and ran back to the safety of the maintenance building. I stayed there until I heard the commotion die down. In the late afternoon, when I finally dared to go back out, I found that the ground near the tracks was disturbed, and there were a few small pebbles and dirt piled up. But other than that, there was no sign of anything. The train cars were still sitting where they were supposed to be. No one else had come to work that day. Besides that, there was no sign of any disturbance or struggle. I've never heard the train again, but sometimes at night when I'm trying to sleep, I swear I can hear it calling out to me from my dreams. Next up is our next story, the Lady in Black. This happened in my hometown in 1987. I was 14 years old and staying at home while my parents traveled. I had two older brothers who lived with their families nearby. One of them had a son who was my age. He and his family lived in a house with a basement apartment. My brother's wife's grandmother and her sister lived in the basement. They were elderly ladies. The grandmother was in a wheelchair, and her sister walked with a cane. They were sisters. One morning I awoke to the sound of someone screaming bloody murder. Of course, I assumed it was my brother's son playing a prank on someone. Later that day, my other brother stopped by for dinner. He and I went out back to have a cigarette, and he told me that his mother-in-law and his mother had gone to town to do some shopping. We both thought it was odd that they would go shopping together since they couldn't drive. They both held a valid driver's license and drove their own cars. My brother called his wife and asked her if she had heard from her mother, but she hadn't. My brother became agitated and immediately jumped in his truck and drove to town. About 30 minutes later, my brother came racing back home, slamming doors, yelling and waving his arms in the air. He said that he found both his mother and mother-in-law lying dead in their cars in front of the supermarket. Both had suffered massive heart attacks. Oddly enough, both ladies had died wearing identical outfits, black dresses, black shoes, and black stockings. They also had been wearing the same black hat that my brother's wife had crocheted for each of them. Both ladies had died in their seats, slumped over the steering wheels. The doctors later said that both ladies died instantly. There was no pain, no suffering. My brother's mother-in-law had been due to have an operation on her knee in 2 weeks and was very worried about it. She had often said she wouldn't make it through the surgery. Maybe God took pity on her and gave her a merciful release from pain. Who knows? What I do know is that the last time I looked, both ladies were buried in matching black dresses in the family plot in the local cemetery. Next up is our next story, Ghost Cat. This happened in my childhood home in Michigan. My father passed away 10 years ago, and my mother passed away 6 years ago. They both passed away in our family home. For years after my father passed, I would often hear his footsteps walking around the house. Sometimes I would even feel his presence walk past me and nudge me. I never felt scared or sad. I just felt comforted knowing he was happy. Well, after my mom passed away, I moved into the home where my dad and mom had lived. After I moved in, I started hearing footsteps again, which I assumed was my dad, but the footsteps were different. I could tell it was my mother walking around the house. I would hear her high heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Sometimes I would wake up, and she would be standing right next to my bed. Again, I don't feel sad or scared. I just feel her love and happiness. I also have a cat. And last week, my cat, Midnight, who is black by the way, was acting weird. I could not find her anywhere. I was calling her name and she wasn't meowing back. I kept looking for her, and eventually I looked under the living room table, and there she was. She looked very frightened, hiding under the table. Tried to pick her up and pet her and comfort her, but she bit me hard and ran and hid again. I finally convinced her to come out and pet her, and I noticed she had a white spot on her side. It looked like a paw print. I tried to take a picture, but it vanished. I know in my heart that my mom was visiting me, and she left that mark on my kitty, so I would know that she was here. And thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this episode of Fear Awaits, let us know in the comments below. And tell us about a time you may have seen a ghost. If you want to help us put out more episodes, please consider supporting us. I'll see you next time.